NBA is another league that has some scheduling interest. And the big question is, when can we see the NBA return and what will it look like? Right? They played 80% of their games just about. Teams have played just about 65 of the 82 games on their schedule. Adrian Wojnarowski is reporting that NBA is basically bracing for a mid to late June at best return. Now, it's interesting because Mark Cuban, owner of the Mavericks, obviously Shark Tank superstar, and just one of the most outspoken and great owners in the NBA and really in sports, he had an interesting timeline. He hopes for an earlier timeline. He cited mid-May. And so he's kind of following the same guidelines as Rob Manfred MLB is, where he's hoping that by mid-May, the NBA could be back. And I'm sure if it's mid-May, that would probably mean that playing games in empty arenas to start. But that also mean you would probably finish as much as possible the regular season. And I'm interested because obviously coronavirus is very serious. So I'm not trying to diminish the virus or, not be aware of how severe it is. So please at least understand that's where I'm coming from. And when I say what I'm about to say, I don't mean that this is just a slight inconvenience. It's really nothing major. Like, this is obviously a worldwide pandemic and is extremely serious. But if we're talking about strictly sports, just looking at it from a strictly sports point of view, looking at the season stopping in the middle and trying to restart and try to get back to as normal as possible, could the NBA season being delayed, again, coronavirus and the seriousness aside, actually be good for the league? Mark Cuban thinks so, and I actually agree with him. And here's why. A few weeks ago, we talked about this. You had Hawks CEO Steve Koonin. He laid out a plan a few weeks ago, back in January, even before the season was cut short by coronavirus, even before really stopping the season, even before coronavirus was really even a serious concern in this country. He laid out a few weeks ago a plan as to how the NBA could garner more interest in the regular season, in the playoffs, and basically hold a strong, basically a good foothold on the second main sport in the U.S. behind football and behind the NFL. And his idea was basically you start the season in December, which unofficially, unless you are a diehard NBA fan, most of the national media and most of the average to pretty interested NBA fan will really start tuning in for real, really start kind of getting, into these games right around Christmas time, right? Christmas time, Christmas Day, the 5 games that they roll out on Christmas Day is basically the unofficial start to the NBA season. Despite it starting in October, going through 2 weeks, people mostly start to pay attention right around Christmas Day. So Steve Koonin saying, well, if that's when people start to focus in and start to actually pay attention to our league and get into the games, why not just start Christmas Day? Which would mean that the playoffs would be pushed back and start in June. Instead of ending in June, it would start in June. And you have the finals basically go on in August. So take over the entire summer calendar, where just baseball has a stranglehold for the most part, and inject the NBA playoffs. And to me, this makes all the sense in the world if you're the NBA. Because especially with the NFL adding a 17th game, the season is only expanding if you're the NFL. So if you're the NBA, you're trying to have some sort of foothold, you're trying to have some sort of relevance in the sports landscape. Starting your season in October and basically being irrelevant for the first 2 months. And now it's going to change, maybe even first 2.5 or 3 months, because now the NFL season is adding a 17th game. So the regular season is going to get longer, the playoffs are going to get longer, and the Super Bowl is going to be pushed back. So now all of a sudden, instead of early February, maybe you're talking about mid-February to where the NFL schedule concludes and the Super Bowl is done. So now, if you start in December, obviously Christmas Day is going to be still a huge following. You may even get more viewers because that's finally for these fans, that's the first time they could see their teams play. You're going to have some great matchups, obviously, as they always do. And now you're going to add more relevancy to the league, because instead of having your chance or having the risk of being irrelevant for, let's just say, not just 2 months, but maybe 3 or 4 months until the NFL season is well out of the picture, you save yourself and put yourself in the forefront to where now, if you start Christmas Day, maybe you only have a month and a half of where people aren't paying attention too much. And then once the Super Bowl ends, now people will be locked in on the NBA. And especially once the playoffs come in June, it's going to be that in baseball. And obviously, as we know, baseball is not a national sport. It is a very regional sport. So to have NBA playoffs going on that time, I think it will be better for the ratings. And that's what Mark Cuban is talking about. The ratings will be through the roof for the playoffs and the finals, because there's really nothing else competing against it. You look when the finals and the playoffs are now in April, May, and June. You have NHL playoffs going on. You have obviously the NBA playoffs going on. And you have MLB starting. Not to mention March Madness, despite not really having to do with the playoffs, but towards the end of the year. So you have the regular season ending when March Madness is starting. You have MLB kicking off, and then you have the NHL playoffs coming down the line. So there's a lot going on, both at the beginning of the season for the NBA and the end of the regular season for the NBA. So just now, if you start it later on and you end the regular season, let's say late May, early June, you can absolutely get more fans, and I think more people will be paying attention to the NBA. And not to mention, obviously, this is a radical situation thrown out by Koonin, right? Like, this is, you have to basically be all in. You can't test this. Because once you go about changing the schedule, once you start the season in December, you push it back 2 months, there's basically no going back. Because if let's say they do that 1 year and it doesn't work out, and all of a sudden now the finals are in August, really nothing's changed rating-wise. The players aren't happy about it. They just rather keep the season and go back to the way it is starting in October and ending in June. Well, all of a sudden now it's harder to go back because once the finals end in August, you're going to start the season again in 2 months. And have all these players, especially the teams that made the playoffs, made it deeper on the playoffs, or go to the finals now, basically have a month and a half off, not even, before they have to go back to a grueling, long regular season. And that's the thing about this plan that's risky per se, just without anything forcing them to do, is because once you go in, you're basically stuck there. Whether it works or not, it's hard to kind of pivot out of a new schedule and kind of either pushing the season or condensing one season and then also having a quick turnaround for the following year. So at least the reason why I say that this break for the NBA could actually be good for the league is because this theory is basically allowed to get tested risk-free. The NBA doesn't have an option right now. They are forced to push the season back. So let's say that it happens on June 1st. Well, let's just say that MLB resumes June 1st. Let's just say, for argument's sake, NBA, same thing. The regular season comes back June 1st. This is a great chance where you can play maybe a truncated or almost all the regular season, then have 2 months of playoffs in July and August, but you want to have the finals in August. If it works, the interest is higher, the ratings are better, you can keep it. Because guess what? If that's the case, you're already forced to push your season back next year just because the season was forced to push back already. So now, no matter what happens, if it works good or not, you have at least a proving ground and a testing ground to where you won't get criticized because you had no other choice. Right? If this doesn't work, sure, it may hurt next year. You may have to make some choices next year about maybe cutting back some games or, condensing the schedule a little bit more. But at least this break in the NBA season allows the NBA to test this theory. And obviously you hear Mark Cuban's all on it. And at least allows them to give them a sample size of how NBA playoffs would rate in the summertime and how finals would rate in August compared to, again, June. And really, is right now, the only thing that would suffer in terms of if the full-time schedule is moved from December to August is really the draft and free agency. Obviously, last year, free agency was the biggest probably of all time in the NBA when you have so many big-time free agents leaving. And obviously, July 1st, it was all NBA for a few weeks there. And basically, the NBA dominated the month of July. So obviously, you have the draft and free agency suffer because if the finals end in August, you probably have the draft and free agency around September or so, which obviously right in the swing of NFL and college football starting, you'd probably lose some attention for that. But, you're not relying too much on the draft and NBA to bring in massive ratings anyway, especially considering that most years are not like what happened last year, right? Last year was an anomaly where you had all these big-time stars being available and trading places. That's not going to happen, especially this year. That's not going to happen. It's not going to happen too often. So at least that suffering, I think, would be a good long-term goal for the NBA because now you have the regular season being boosted and the playoffs being boosted. So less regular season competition would be a plus for the NBA, and I think all around, if they follow kind of the plan that Steve Koonin laid out, and where even if you play, let's say, just about, again, 17 games, let's say you play 8 or 10 games left, right? Just kind of condense it a little bit, so where you still have kind of the playoffs on schedule, but you don't want to play the full 17 because it kind of pushes it back too late. You do that, fine. It gives you a proving ground and a testing ground to see if this new NBA schedule possibly could work, possibly be equitable going forward, and you may be able to implement it as soon as next year. If it works and you push the season back to December and you start it December 2020, you're off and running. You don't have to worry about anything again. The season's already in place. The schedule's already been changed. Players are aware and adapting. And from there, if this works, you could really change the landscape and have NBA solidify themselves as that second main sport. So let's get your thoughts on it. And would you be open to the NBA? Right? I mean, I personally would not. I'm a huge baseball fan. So at least to me, I enjoy the summers. I don't get sick of watching Mets baseball or whatever baseball game is broadcast nationally on ESPN. So at least to me, I do enjoy the grind of the MLB season, and I do kind of enjoy sitting down every night watching just the Mets or, again, whatever game is being televised nationally. So I don't really need the NBA personally to expand to June, July, and August because I'm not desperate for sports because I have my sports fixed enough with baseball. And so at least trying to, balance watching the playoff games and baseball games, at least to me, I would not be totally for it. But I think overall for the health of the league, for the goodness of the league, and the attention and relevancy for the league, I think it would be absolutely a home run for the association.